Welcome everyone to our Final Five Fridays, St. Charles to Lincoln panel conversation. My name is Tommy. I use he, him pronouns, and I'm a fellow with the Final Five campaign. Thank you so much for joining us today. We have an exciting program with special guests. We have a pretty small group today. I see that there's only about 12 of us. So if you're comfortable, please feel free to introduce yourself in the chat with your name, pronouns, and where you're calling in from. Before we get started with our panel discussion, which will be talking about the connections between IYC St. Charles, a youth prison 45 miles west of Chicago, and the new youth prison, which Governor Pritzker plans to construct as part of his 21st century transformation model. We'll be talking about the links between those two facilities. But before we get started with the panel discussion, I just want to give a brief introduction to the Final Five campaign and the two facilities itself for folks who might not be familiar. So what is the Final Five campaign? The Final Five campaign is a coalition of advocates and system-impacted youth fighting to close the 5 remaining Illinois youth prisons. Just 10 years ago, there were 8 youth prisons incarcerating nearly 1,200 young people across our state. Now there are 5 youth prisons incarcerating only 100 youth. We as a campaign are advocating that Illinois close these remaining prisons permanently and put the money spent on incarcerating young people towards investment in the communities most impacted by youth incarceration. So now I'll just share my screen to run through an introduction to IYC St. Charles and the announced new facility, IYC Lincoln. One second. Can everyone see that? I think so. Okay. So I'll drop our 5 priorities as a campaign in the chat at some point after this, but one of our priorities is to close the Final 5 youth prisons with IYC St. Charles and IYC Harrisburg, the 2 largest facilities leading the way. So IYC St. Charles is a medium security facility. A little bit on IYC, it's Illinois Youth Center, but there's nothing youthful about these places. They are prisons with lock cells and barbed wire. It's just a name that IDJJ gives towards the facility. But IYC St. Charles is a medium security facility located approximately 45 miles west of Chicago. It was built in 1902 and opened in 1904. It's now 127 years old, a deteriorating and violent institution that serves as the Northern Reception and Classification Facility for Illinois. So that means it's the intake center and processes the majority of all male youth who are committed to IDJJ. So despite how violent it is and the deteriorating conditions, almost all youth who are incarcerated in the state of Illinois have to go through St. Charles first. And despite having a capacity of 348 at the current moment on any day, the facility holds around 30 to 40 youth. So it's very feasible to close this and redirect those resources towards alternatives. A little more, and also some background on the quote. So that's a quote from a young person who's incarcerated at IYC St. Charles. They partook in the Reimagining Youth Justice convenings facilitated by the Children and Family Justice Center. So you can see there, that's a picture of a cell at St. Charles and the showers. It's a violent facility with very bad conditions that subject children to the violent conditions of a prison. Additionally, so as I said, it's 127 years old and many of the original buildings are still standing. So the physical space of St. Charles contains numerous buildings, many of which are either closed because they are in need of major repairs, are not inhabitable, or are no longer in use. St. Charles comprises 8 housing units labeled as cottages. Many are in disrepair. And all movement within the facility is restricted and surveilled. So I've worked with youth at St. Charles in a variety of capacity with restorative justice programming and writing workshops at the facility, and just seeing the conditions. It's pretty dire. It's littered with abandoned buildings that can't be torn down, I believe, because it has national landmark status. But here's another quote from a young person who is incarcerated at IYC St. Charles. "We live in cottages. Cottages are abandoned buildings, so we sleep with our clothes and shoes on because sometimes it's so cold." From this, you can see the need for immediate closure. It's a violent institution that no one deserves to be housed in, especially young people, some as young as 12 and 13. So in late 2020, Governor Pritzker announced a transition from an adult prison system within IDJJ to small regional residential centers, which will be restorative and developmentally appropriate for youth. So while this might seem like a positive development, the plan also includes the construction of a new youth prison in Lincoln, Illinois. So that facility will be named Illinois Youth Center Lincoln. Pritzker plans to recuperate the Lincoln Developmental Center to incarcerate up to 30 youth, which is about the number of youth who are currently incarcerated at St. Charles. Built in 1875, LDC was a youth mental asylum and had a long track record of abuse and reported deaths. It lies adjacent to two adult state prisons, Lincoln and Logan. And in 2002, Governor George Ryan closed LDC after reports of abuse, neglect, and preventable deaths. And that's a picture that was gained from the Lincoln Courier's report on Lincoln Developmental Center, but it's an abandoned building right now that Pritzker wants to spend $21 million to recuperate. And so this, the first connection between this and IYC St. Charles is part of the plan. The 21st century transformation model is to transition IYC St. Charles to an adult prison in the hands of the Illinois Department of Corrections, and have more youth housed at the IYC Lincoln facility that's opened. So it's currently being advertised by the administration as a life-affirming, restorative, rehabilitative, and community-based youth prison. But the facility has a history of abuse and violence. It lies adjacent to two adult prisons and lies in a rural, mostly white prison town that is some 40 to 60 miles away from where most youth in central Illinois, where the homes of most youth who are committed to IDJJ in central Illinois. So with that introduction to the two facilities, I'd like to introduce our panelists who will be talking more about the connections between IYC St. Charles and IYC Lincoln and the need for closure of these facilities. 1 second. So we have Javon Jackson, who is a Final Five campaign youth leader. In addition to helping guide strategy of the campaign, he leads the alternatives working group of the campaign. Carl King, who is an advocate and organizer for social change connected with ongoing efforts around mental health, affordable housing, and criminal justice reform. He is a resident of St. Charles with his wife and 5 children. In addition to his advocacy work, he's a business owner, writer, and musician, entrepreneur, and author of multiple books. And Jennifer Vollen-Katz, who is the executive director of John Howard Association, an organization that independently monitors correctional facilities, policies, and practices, and advances reforms needed to achieve a fair, humane, and effective criminal justice system. She was named executive director in 2015, but joined JHA in 2012 as the Juvenile Justice Program Director, leading the organization's juvenile facility monitoring work and policy initiatives. So to start off the panel, if we could just go around, and I just gave introductions, but if you could introduce yourself one more with your name, pronouns, and how your work relates to the discussion today, and then we'll kick off some questions. So Jay, could you start?
Yeah, hi everyone. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Yeah, hi everyone. I'm Jay. Oh, and I'm a youth leader. I'm also a juvenile justice advocate, and happy to be here. Sorry, you guys.
Thanks, Jay. Jenny.
Sure. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you so much for inviting me into this conversation. My name's Jenny Vollen-Katz. I use she, hers pronouns. I'm the executive director at the John Howard Association, and we go into the facilities to monitor for the conditions of confinement and the treatment of the people who are incarcerated in both the juvenile system and the adult system. We have long had a lot of concerns about the conditions inside the youth facilities. Illinois has done some great work to lower the population inside our facilities, which, gives us so many more opportunities to think about how we can better help youth in conflict with the law and come up with different solutions. And I just want to thank you, Tom, for when you mentioned what IYC stands for. I was criticized strongly in 2012 when I refused. I referred to Kiwanee, which was then a youth facility run by IDJJ, as a youth prison. And I was told that I was using the wrong nomenclature, that IYC stood for Illinois Youth Center, that we didn't have juvenile prisons. And I said, well, you'll have to excuse me, but I was just inside that facility, and what I was in was a youth prison. So I'm going to go ahead and call it that. So it's been an interesting and ongoing conversation in Illinois, frankly, the words we use and the reality of the facilities we've built and run.
Thanks so much, Jennifer. And Carl, could you introduce yourself?
Hey everybody, Carl King, he, him pronouns, and yeah, I'm just thankful to be here. Still on quite a journey and learning. I guess I connected with kind of this whole idea and work. I was looking honestly through Instagram, and back in 2013, I tweeted a picture or messaged a picture of IYC and that sign out there, IYC St. Charles. And you know, I've been on a journey of from prison work in Fort Worth, Texas, to now in IYC St. Charles, and you know, and understanding that all the resources that we're spending on these young people to be locked up in substandard conditions, you know, we need to use that money, keep using the money, and you know, I'm a huge advocate of that, but use it to help the families, make them whole, and invest in those communities that are, you know, struggling already, and yeah, let's do this work. So thankful to be here.
Awesome. Thank you all for joining the conversation today. I'm really excited to have this discussion. So to kick us off, Jenny, this question is for you. Broadly speaking, can you discuss the realities, harms, and impacts of incarceration on youth?
Sure. You know, I think that, well, first of all, so many of the people on this call are people I work with regularly, and I know are deeply ensconced in these issues as well. So, you know, I appreciate that, and I know there's so much to add to this conversation, and I'm going to try and not go down rabbit holes, and I'm also going to try and not repeat things that I know this group is so well aware of, but understanding that at a later point there may be people newer to the conversation, listening to this conversation, and we want to make sure that we have filled in the gaps and given them what they need to be active in this conversation. So, you know, what I can say is, since I've started doing this work, we have come to understand two things. One, the unique nature of youth development and brain development, and that children are different than adults. I mean, I think it's something that a lot of practitioners understood or felt intuitively, but now there's a lot of concrete evidence out there and legal opinions sort of certifying in another discipline what the science tells us, which is children are capable of change. And what we need to be doing is helping them to achieve that change. And when we come at them with, you know, pure punishment, we don't get the results we're looking for. We stymie growth and development, we cause more trauma, and we make a bad situation worse, quite frankly. So I don't think there's any such thing as a youth center or a youth prison or a juvenile center that is going to help us get where we want to be if what we want to do is help our youth chart a different path forward, and to go forward avoiding conflict with the law and being productive members of society. One of the few things that, you know, we've done really well in Illinois is bring the population down. So when I started doing this work in 2012, we had close to 1,000 youth in facilities that were run by the Illinois Department of Juvenile Justice, with capacity for, I think, over 1,200. We now have just over 100 kids in custody. So we are at least reducing the harm being, you know, visited. And now I think we're well poised to take these next steps and make sure that we are getting these 100+ kids what they need in their communities. And that means being holistic. That means looking at what are their traumas, what are their needs, What are their, are there mental health issues that have gone untreated or need to be treated differently or better? We know that a huge percentage of youth in custody in Illinois have mental health diagnoses, as well as are taking medication for mental health issues. Understanding where the problems come from and what's exacerbating them, and then addressing those issues, understanding that that means giving families what they need to help their youth, and looking at the communities kids are in and giving those communities what they need to create opportunity and provide the kind of support that's missing, that will help youth go forward differently. So I'm not sure if I fully answered the question, because I may have gone off somewhere there, but we can do better than incarceration for our youth. We can and we should. Any way you slice it, when we put kids in these facilities, we are causing harm. We're keeping them from their families and loved ones. The benefits of structure that some people talk about, I believe, are really false, because the minute they leave and they don't have that structure to work within, it's no longer effective. So I don't necessarily buy that it's effective in the moment, but for those who believe it has a lasting effect, it's been shown over and over that it absolutely does not. What kids need is love and support and help. And what they don't need is the kind of trauma that being in any carceral environment can visit upon people.
Yeah, thank you so much for that, Jenny. And I have a follow-up question, because as I noted before, the transformation model that Pritzker announced plans to build a small community-based restorative a locked facility that would still incarcerate youth. So I was wondering if you could talk about the pitfalls of reforms that may improve the conditions of a prison, but don't actually decarcerate.
Sure. So, I think one of the things we have to think about is, what does it mean to lock our youth away, away from their families, away from their communities, away from their loved ones, where they can't have regular contact with them. There may be visiting days, there may be phone calls, but where their, own families aren't there to check on them and to see them and to have the kind of, day-to-day feedback that so many of us experience in a family situation that gives us a lot of information about how a loved one is doing. There are certain problems in carceral environments that you simply can't get away from. For instance, how the staff in any facility behave. There is very little way to control that. There's very little way to see it. There's very little ways to control it. And frankly, one of the concerns that the John Howard Association has had over the years that we have documented is how staff treat youth in the IDJJ facilities. And I think Harrisburg is probably the best example of treatment that happens that's deeply traumatizing and problematic, and frankly just hideous, that we have been responsive to, but responsive after the fact. It's not okay for us to find out about these things and then try to correct, because that means those things are happening. And that's not safe. It's not safe for our kids, and it's not the best way to treat them. If people need to be removed from their families because they need treatment, then we need to be approaching that as the public health situation that it is, and giving them the kind of care that they need in an environment that is designed to deliver that care.
So thank you. So now I wanted to pivot to a focus on the conditions of Central Illinois. So this question is for you, Jay, as a resident in the East St. Louis area. So Central Illinois faces some unique challenges. Can you speak on some of the social condition of cities like Peoria, Decatur, and Champaign that may lead to a young person's incarceration? How may those conditions differ from what you may see in Chicago?
Chicago has a lot of resources. Like you said, I'm here in the East St. Louis area, and there's absolutely nothing down here, nothing. I've tried. I've talked to youth pastors. There's just absolutely nothing, even just down here. But as far as Peoria and even the Champaign area, there's unless you go to jail and then you're able to receive some of these services. So some of these services aren't offered to people unless they have a DJJ tag or even a DCFS tag. So and a lot of not being able to be provided any resources would most definitely result in someone going into the community doing bad things, or just, you know, being locked up, I guess.
Yeah, totally. Thank you, Jay. And a follow-up question with that. So I mentioned how Lincoln is in a town with 2 adult state prisons that is predominantly white. What are some of the problems with placing a new youth prison in a rural, mostly white prison town like Lincoln, Illinois?
What was that question again?
So could you discuss some of the problems with placing a youth prison, a new youth prison, in a rural, mostly white town with 2 adult state prisons, such as Lincoln?
Oh yeah. So I've visited Lincoln. There, it's not a nice town. You know what I mean? The people there are even horrible. Some of the people there are even horrible. I mean, and I just think that sending, you know, minority youth to a place where, you know, mainly Caucasian people who, you know, who have a history in that town, even the police, of, you know, terrorizing people. And I just think that, you know, moving youth into another locked facility, it just doesn't do anything. You know what I mean? And, you know, it's just, I feel like, and even too, you know, we talk about like a lot of the youth are dealing with like anxiety and all that good stuff, but a lot of that comes from them being in that facility too, in that room all day. You got to think about it. You know, some of these kids, you know, if you're not at school or if you graduated, you're in your room. You know what I mean? You know, you're just staring at the walls. If you have no work, no commissary, no anything. So it's just like they create the anxiety and the mental health issues by having the youth locked up in those facilities.
Yeah, thank you, Jay. So I wanted to ask you a question, Carl. So do the conditions that Jay talked about mirror your experiences of youth who you worked with at St. Charles? Could you tell us a little bit more about the work you've done at St. Charles and what you hope for the future of your community?
Yeah, so I actually got involved with IYC St. Charles as a pastor of youth in St. Charles, and so working with young people, predominantly white young people, and seeing the programs that were created for them. You know, programs that were like, we're going to do this diversionary program, we're going to do this drug program, we're going to do this treatment program. And then an evangelical group reached out to me. It was like, hey, will you come into this this youth prison? They didn't call it that, Jennifer. We go to this facility and will you sing and do some music? And so it's like, yeah. So going in there and then seeing the conditions, but also seeing that it's predominantly Black and brown young people, like I think 95%, right? And I guess, you know, initially, I mean, to be honest, we talked about many different people that are on a different journey and a path to this desire for abolition. And back then, I was really kind of, you know, I thought that maybe it's okay, maybe this is a way for reforming young people. You know, some of those same, you know, ideologies or whatever. And after talking with young people there, talking with the guards, and then seeing some of the reports, right? Like IYC St. Charles, there was a 4 guards that got busted for running a ring, you know, abusing young people, right, and making them abuse others, and basically like this this whole setup, right, for discipline, they called it. And then seeing an organization called Feed My Starving Children would come in and they use the young people to basically generate their product and profit. And so, you know, this idea of young people being used for prison labor, and, you know, seeing all of this stuff, seeing the patronizing attitudes that many adults have towards these young people. So yeah, to your point, there is a huge disparity, right, in the conditions that young people in the prison receive versus young people outside of the prison, and specifically St. Charles, Geneva, are probably 95% white communities, right? Well resourced. And so you're taking young people from Elgin, from Aurora, from Chicago proper, south and west sides of Chicago. You're yanking them out of their family environment. You're yanking them out of their community. You're putting them in this place that's violent, that's abusive, that has people that basically look at them as, almost punching bags on some level. And I know that's harsh language and it's traumatizing, but it's the reality for those young people. So yeah, that definitely mirrors the experiences of young people in IYC St. Charles.
Thank you, Carl. Yeah, I want to add something to what Jay, Carl, and Jenny, you've all mentioned, that it seems like restorative justice and putting youth in locked facilities are incompatible, or kind of oxymorons that you see at St. Charles. There's like champion restorative justice programming, but what is traumatizing youth is being in that facility some 50 miles away from their family members who often can't visit because of the distance and financial stress that puts on that family. So you have a facility that's going to be built in a town with 2 adult prisons that is being championed as restorative, yet is doing that same thing, putting youth in a locked facility in a predominantly white town, some 40 to 60 miles away from Peoria, Champaign, and other cities in central Illinois that commit the most youth to IDJJ. Yeah, so that was just something that came up that was generated from the comments that you made. And Jenny, do you have a point?
Yeah, I just wanted to sort of point out along those same lines, and something Carl said kind of made me think that I haven't really sort of articulated this fully, or I didn't in my last response. But I mean, we don't let our kids go to school for the day without some sense of who their teachers are and what's happening to them, and getting feedback, right? I mean, we don't allow people we don't know to just be with our kids in unmonitored situations, right? But most of the free world. And so to think that it is okay for these youth, who've been traumatized, to be put in an environment where no one who loves them, can see what's happening to them, can hear in real time what's happening to them, should be very disturbing for people outside the juvenile justice reform and advocate arenas, who are new to these issues. When you take a kid away from their family, and certainly, there are kids in the system who are duly involved, who may not have families looking out for them, that may not have that support system, which is a different kind of issue. But, I think we need to think a lot about some of the abuses and some of the neglect that occur regularly inside carceral environments, and the lack of recourse available. We do have an Office of Ombudsman for the Department of Juvenile Justice, which has been enormously helpful and illuminating, and was a huge step forward for the state of Illinois. But it's not enough. And that's not enough for any parent to feel confident that their kid is safe and being treated fairly. And we particularly do see this, unfortunately, in the southern part of the state, where the demographics inside the facilities are so different than the ones outside the facilities. And what you have is a lot of Black and brown people who are incarcerated, and almost all white correctional staff. And the tension inside those facilities, the racism is palpable. And it is, really difficult to walk into those facilities, to learn about this, to see this, and to understand that the minute you walk out, it doesn't stop. It hasn't changed. That spotting it, identifying it, naming it, shining a light on it isn't enough to stop it. And that's really why kids don't belong in these kinds of facilities at all.
Thank you for that, Jenny. And Carl and Jay, feel free to jump in if you have any further remarks. If not, I was going to go to one more question.
Well, I think, I guess I just want to go back to this idea of people that are on the spectrum of understanding and, if not empathizing, but understanding the need for the closure of these facilities. I think one of the questions I've received out here, actually talking with parents, is, what about these young people that have done something horrible there may be a danger to the community or whatever. And my response has always been, what do you do with your kids, right? If your child does something that is heinous, you don't throw them away. You don't lock them up. You want to help them. Either you find a mental health facility for them, whether that's private or public. You find something that helps them, and you walk with them through that journey. And I think if we can have that same attitude towards all children, all young people, and the end result is all adults, right? Everyone, all of humanity. And so, unfortunately, there's this persistent, patronizing attitude towards Black and Brown youth that says, that they, they need more, carceral solutions, or they're badder in some way, and it's just a very twisted reasoning that I'm working with and fighting against out here. And you talked about some of the things that we've done. I mean, like we've worked with, for instance, there was a juvenile justice council in Kane County that was imagined and received federal funding. And my question to them was, as I was trying to get involved with them, was how does your role differ from the role of prison guards? And you're a juvenile justice council, but there seems to be some type of a conflict of interest, right? Because if you succeed in actually reforming, and I hate that word, but fixing youth prison, whatever, one of your jobs is going to go out of existence. And we worked on helping to get young people expunged their records and things like that. We've worked with politicians to try and work on getting affordable housing built out at IYC, and that's ongoing right now, as well as talking with the mayor of St. Charles. And Tom, you asked specifically about the work that we're trying to do right now, trying to get IYC St. Charles shut down and that property reallocated. So those are some of the things that just come to mind right now.
Thanks for that, Carl. Jay, I want to give you a chance to add any comments. If not, we'll move on to the last question for all three of you.
Yeah, I don't have any comment.
Okay. So this question is for each of you. So we can go kind of in order. Jenny, Carl, and then Jay. In your view, what is most needed in your community to help prevent harm and support youth?
So I happen to live in a community where not all that much is needed, so it's probably I won't get all that personal about it. Yeah, but I will tell you, as someone who's currently raising teenagers, Carl said it best when he said, if that were your kid, you don't throw them away, because here's the deal: they make lots and lots of mistakes, and they will try your patience every which way, whether what they're doing is legal or illegal or somewhere in between. And so I would say I feel closer to the work of juvenile justice now than I ever have, having children that could be touched by that system, and understanding the impulsiveness that goes with the teenage years and lack of brain development and things of that nature. So I appreciate that comment a lot and take it very personally. Look, I think in Illinois, we have a real opportunity here. And I want to make sure that I'm clear that so much of what we're talking about, I think, should be available to everybody, not just juveniles. I think we've lost a lot of adults because we treated them poorly as kids, and I in no way want to sacrifice them. But we have a real opportunity on the juvenile side, based on the governor's commitment to the transformation model, the number of facilities we've already closed, and the population where it stands now is really an opportunity. If one just runs the numbers, you can see that paying to run these big facilities, which cost millions of dollars a year, is just not a great way to use our resources. Imagine if we took that money put it into the homes of the kids who need it, and the communities that they're in, to pay for whatever it is. And I think that has to be a very specific, very individual assessment. I don't pretend to have the answers inside every community. And I think that's where you need to go to the communities and find the stakeholders there that best understand what's missing and what's needed to get kids what they need. But I do feel confident that that would be less expensive and more beneficial to the kids and their families and their communities. Ultimately, when you can take those dollars and invest them in ways that are truly rehabilitative and therapeutic and meeting needs. Even if a kid adjusts to an institutional setting, is that really what we want for them? Is that really the end? What is the end goal here? I think what we want are well-adjusted people who are connected to their families, to their communities, because connection helps foster a lot of really good development and growth and willingness to change. And you don't know who it is that's going to touch a child. You don't know if it's going to be, a parent or an uncle or a teacher or a community member or a pastor, but we need to open up the possibilities, for people in their lives to stick with them and be there for them and help foster this kind of development and change. And I think, part of that is reinvesting those dollars more directly into the people that need the investment. And I think it's also, looking at violent crime and understanding it better, and understanding what fuels it, and understanding who's doing it and why, and dispelling a lot of the myths around it. Because what continues to drive a lot of the narrative around the need for prison is fear. And I think if we could start to talk more honestly about that and clearly, we might make some progress in helping people understand why, we can help youth and get really good outcomes rather than punish them and just continue these really terrible cycles.
Yeah, thank you for that, Jenny. I would add, speaking of St. Charles specifically, I'll tell you what needs to happen in this community is to prevent harm. Back in 2015, Governor Rauner proposed the plan to shut down all suburban youth prisons, right? And that was based on his idea of cost savings and cutting measures. Many of the legislators that are currently in office supported that plan, right? I don't think this is a partisan thing. I think this is a thing that we should do because it makes sense, it prevents harm, and it supports youth. We need to shut down the IYC St. Charles. And in St. Charles specifically, we have, and surrounding areas, and we say that, we have mental health agencies, we have community service agencies that are struggling. Some that even the executive directors are doing clinical work because they're either short-staffed or they're lacking money. Coronavirus has hit everyone very, very hard. And so there's this great opportunity right now that we could shift all of those funds. We can invest in community health. We can invest in safety. We can invest in things that do not do harm, but that actually create whole and healthy human beings. And I think we have a great opportunity. And I think we should do that. So that's my answer.
Yeah. So I think for my community, I mean, down here, you guys, it could use a lot of everything. Just like, in general, like there isn't even like a DMV that's like 30 minutes away. You know what I mean? Like that's even ridiculous. And even, we're thinking about like daycares, and just the other day, matter of fact, I want to say, just the other day, I was out and I actually seen some kids that were some young kids who had to ride the Metrolink all the way to St. Louis just to go to the YMCA because the YMCA was closed. You know what I mean? So just little things like that, when boredom strikes, what do you do? What if they didn't have any money? What if they didn't have, have a membership or anything, things, you're young, you're a group of guys, get bored. So, no telling what they could have went out and did. But speaking, just like on the juvenile part, I think like down here in the Belleville area, a lot of kids, I think, get charged as adults. I was just looking at the little rap sheet, and I've seen a few 17-year-olds, 16-year-olds on there. So a lot of kids don't even get the chance or even get, the opportunity to correct their wrongs. They're automatically, just sent to the adult system. And like Jennifer said, there's a lot of adults, currently in prison now that didn't get the right chance as a youth, which is why they're currently locked up, and which is why they keep getting locked up. So, and I think also a big component too, when we should, thinking about youth, is the education, that they receive in those facilities. The education is so poor, and then we see such a big rate when they get released of them going back out to commit, some of the same crimes and stuff. Is because they're, when they're in those places, they aren't even getting the tools that they need to get out to be successful. They get out and be stuck. So I think that, when you said my community needs, I think that the community just needs someone to care. What would you want for your children? Like you said, what would you want for your children? And I'm pretty sure a lot of these people, who do this work and make all these big decisions, wouldn't dare put one of the kids in one of those positions to be in jail. I just know they wouldn't. So yeah, I think that we just need people to care and start acting, like kids are kids and not adults. I think we all make, decisions, and some of us get the chance to make right with those decisions, but all kids deserve a second chance. So that's how I feel about it.
Thank you so much, Jay. That was a great way to close the panel. And thank you to all three of you for taking this conversation. It was really generative, and I appreciate your time in speaking with me and for this event. We're going to transition. We have like a good 15 minutes left. We are going to, because it's a small group, we were thinking we could break out into 2 breakout rooms and just talk about our own takeaways from this panel. And introduce and get to know each other a little bit. So we're going to break out into 2 breakout rooms for like 5 to 10 minutes and answer these 2 questions that I'll drop in the chat. And then we'll close out the event by coming back together in a big group and sharing back highlights from our breakout groups. So I will make the breakout rooms now. I hope we had a generative conversation in our breakout room. So I don't know if you appointed someone to share out from your group, but does somebody want to share out from room 2 what you guys talked about?
I'm going to go ahead and nominate Jackie or Jay to be our spokesperson, if that's a reasonable way to proceed.
Go, Jackie.
Okay, so I think that one of the things that we talked about is this concern about geographical problems with closing, and that if you want to have home-based, family-centered placements for youth, there are just service deserts in rural parts of the state that how do you get a kid who lives in the example I use, how do you get a kid who lives in Redbud, Illinois to counseling or whatever services that they need when it's an hour away and the family doesn't have a car or doesn't have reliable transportation. And this notion of that, along with closing the facilities, there needs to also, I think, be this concurrent effort to create services for youth that will allow them to stay as close to home as possible. And then we reflected on, those of us who are familiar with Lincoln, Logan County with Lincoln, are afraid that given this, where that facility is situated, that it's just going to turn into another Harrisburg when it comes to the adult prosecutions of kids. It's not a good place to be putting these youth.
And then Avalon, do you want to share out our takeaways?
Sure. So we said some of the things that pointed out to us was focusing on the language. I pointed out the fact that we were saying that how would you want to treat your child, right? Like in the prisons, just aren't places that we should be putting children in general. And we spent a lot of time focusing on the language piece, and that we need to identify what youth prisons are and call them exactly that. We need to be very clear in how we talk about them, but then we also need to be very cognizant of how we speak about people who have been impacted. And so we need to take that narrative framing and go beyond just okay, we're going to call it a prison, but also start to really humanize the people that have been touched by the criminal legal system. And Julie was very adamant, and I wanted to be her choir in the back with my tambourine and clapping my hands, that we should just call people, right? Like, just use their names. We don't need to use words that inmate or prisoner or any of those things. We just need to call people by their names and be respectful in that way. And she pointed out, which is true, that we dehumanize people, and we give ourselves a pass to do that with the dehumanizing language. It starts with the language first, right? I can treat you differently if I know if I could just refer to you as inmate. So then when I mistreat you, it's fine because you're just an inmate. And so we were just really focusing on that part with regards to our efforts of really trying to be intentional in the language that we use to describe people who have been impacted by the criminal legal system, and not call it a justice system, because it's not justice at all in any way, shape, or form. So that was one of the other things that we talked about, and then we got on that and we kept talking about that.
Thanks so much, Avalon. And thank you, Jackie, for sharing out for the group. So with that, we're a little bit over time, so I'm sorry for taking up 4 more minutes of your time. Everyone's pretty much connected some way to Funnel 5 campaign. But in case you are not following social media, I dropped the links down there to give us a follow on social media. There'll be a recording of this event that'll be on our social media at some point. And yeah, I just want to say thank you to everyone for showing up. Thank you, Stephanie, for doing all the tech support behind the scenes for this event, recording the event. Thank you, Carl, Jay, and Jenny for speaking and being our guests. And thank you all for joining and sharing in the breakout rooms and participating. Yeah. Thank you so much. Have a great weekend. Great rest of your day. Take care.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.